Well, COVID is supposedly, I guess, over, moved on, endemic, whatever word you want to use, but we're having a lot of problems with excess deaths. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, and I'm going to chat for a while. As if you've been watching my channel, you know I'm also on Rockfin, and I do some Rockfin exclusives. This is going to be a Rockfin exclusive for premium members. After a while, we're going to chat for a little bit, and then it's going to be Rockfin exclusive for premium members. I certainly appreciate everybody who follows me and supports the channel. All right, let's talk. And part of the reason is I can't really do, but you can only do but so much when it comes to this subject on YouTube, or you are going to get tossed. So it'll be on Rockfin. It'll be on my Rockfin exclusive for premium members. Okay, let's talk. So what are we talking about? One of the things we're talking about now that's starting to be discussed in some circles is excess deaths. And what does that mean? It just means more people than you would normally expect to die in a given period. Now, keep in mind something. One of the things, and I should have searched that. One of the things that about it, we'll chat about it. A couple of things we're looking at. The numbers are getting to be obvious, so much so that governments can't just dismiss them. You know, we're the crazy conspiracy theorists. Those of us who, I got to get back to this. Those of us who asked legitimate questions about government policy during COVID. I want you to think about what I'm saying. It's not a conspiracy theory to ask legitimate questions about government policy. If the government says you have to take your whatever, you got to take your sugar pill. I don't care what it is, but the government says you have to take it. That's a government policy. The government says you have to do this. It is legitimate to ask about government policy. If the government says you have to wear your seatbelt, remember that? There was a time when they said everybody's got to wear a seatbelt. Everybody's got to wear a helmet. Some states it's not on a motorcycle. Some states that you all do. Some states you don't. And there's a big discussion about it. Well, shouldn't I be able to ride without a helmet? And then the question will be, well, wait a minute. If you have a head injury, then the rest of us have to take care of you. So these, I might add, are legitimate questions, because if you talk about law, if you start talking it from a legal perspective, it becomes this: weighing the interest, and I'm doing this, you can't see, weighing the interest, like on the, the famous law with the lady with the blindfold and the scales, right? Weighing the interest, the interest of your individual liberties, your civil rights, right? To say yes or no versus the interest of the people as a whole, right? In the Constitution, what it is, the whatchamacallit welfare clause. Somebody put in the chat. I'm having a brain cramp here. I've taught this, I know it, but the what, you know what I mean. At any rate, but that's not important now. So what I'm saying is this: that's part of a discussion. But whenever that happens, and the government says for the welfare of all, everybody has to do this, it is legitimate to question that and to ask for data, to ask for background. Well, everybody has to get locked down. There was legitimate questions about lockdowns. The legitimate questions were, do we have any data to indicate that lockdowns will make a difference? Is there any historical data? That was a reasonable question. And what was the other big question about lockdowns? It was, have there been any studies? Has there been any even discussion about the deaths from COVID versus deaths from other lockdown related issues, whether it's suicide, whether it's drugs, whether it's people failure to get their cancer screenings, all kinds of things like that, right? So if we weigh how many people potentially would die from COVID if we don't lock down, would there be more? Do we even know that? Versus how many people will die from other things, businesses destroyed, things of that nature. And there were those of us who said that's a legitimate discussion that we should have. Nope, I didn't say we should or shouldn't have lockdowns. I said we should have a legitimate discussion. By the time it was all said and done, I was opposed to lockdowns, but there were legitimate reasons. I didn't just pull that out of my butt, right? So now excess deaths. So let's start by going to a mainstream uh the conversation, academic rigor, journalistic flair. And you can see where I got that just searching on DuckDuckGo for news. So this is not like I made this up. The very first thing that pops up, the conversation. So I go here. Now, what they say is summer 2022 saw thousands of excess deaths in England and Wales. The US has the highest cumulative number of excess deaths, but not necessarily the highest percentage. But England has a very, very high percentage. And here's now read this closely. And here's why that might be. So here's what I have to say. If you're saying what might have caused it, don't I have a right to say what might have caused it? But that's not the way it works, does it? You can say what might have caused it. Well, why the excess deaths? Well, people are older. They're slipping on banana peels. They're hitting each other over the head with things. They're eating things they shouldn't. Come on. Anything could happen, right? I can say that, or I can be more specific, can I? And I can start looking at some other data and saying perhaps there are reasons that the mainstream media may have an interest in not revealing. So let's look down this. Let's look at this. According to the Office for National Statistics, this summer we've seen more deaths registered in England than expected. That's excess deaths, more than expected. Now, if it's only a couple, okay. But is it significant enough to make a difference? The difference between the actual and expected number of deaths recorded from any cause is known as excess death. During the first 8 weeks of 2022, despite there being 9110 deaths documented from COVID mentioned on the death certificate in England and Wales, there were 8,001 fewer total deaths than anticipated, right? So it's a perfect example. We expect X amount of people to die. X amount of people die. We expected 10,000 people to die. 9,000 people died. We got less deaths than normal. Okay. However, since April, this has flipped. Between April 2nd and August 19th, there were 12,321 deaths registered with COVID on the death certificate. Keep in mind something. With COVID. That doesn't mean from COVID. That's again, we were attacked because we continually said, those of us who questioned government policy, we consistently questioned government policy, said, wait a minute. If someone goes to the hospital and they got hit and they had a tragic chainsaw accident and all 4 of their limbs were sawed off, you test them and they got COVID and they die from loss of blood from the chainsaw accident. Well, guess what? That's with COVID. That's irrelevant. The issue of COVID is irrelevant. Why is COVID even on that? Some guy got shot 50 times by a machine gun. Oh, we tested him and his blood had COVID in it. That's the only thing was left was his blood. The rest of his body was totally torn to shreds. But that little bit of stain of blood left had COVID in it, died with COVID. COVID goes on the paperwork. What's the point of that? Again, we ask again, what's the point of that? There are those of us who felt that there were reasons that weren't possibly of a medical nature. We didn't know. I'm not saying there was or wasn't, but there was question. Again, there was a question. Could there be reasons that are not of a medical nature that people are, there's a move to put as many people as possible into the COVID, bag? We had those questions and it was legitimate questions. Okay. And for those of you who are saying, well, you're stepping a little lightly, that's why I'm going over to Rockfin at about 15 or 20 minutes, because I don't have to step lightly over there. And that's part of my premium. My COVID stuff over on Rockfin is premium. And it's pretty good. You really ought to become a premium member of Rockfin if you can afford the $9.99 a month. If not, just become a subscriber and enjoy everything you can. All right, so we're going. Okay. So there was 1,231 deaths registered with COVID on the death certificate, but notably, now listen to this number, 21,475 excess deaths. So if COVID accounts for a little over half of these excess deaths, what may be driving the rest? Let's say half. But keep in mind something. What's going on now is Omicron. And the number of deaths from Omicron is astronomically lower than the others. So even guessing that many people died from Omicron, in theory, it's possible. But to me, it doesn't seem likely. If you remember when the Omicron wave hit, The Omicron wave hit, and they were like, okay, we're waiting for our first Omicron death, and nobody was dying. And finally they said, we've got one. It's in Texas. Texas, the first Omicron death, the first Omicron death. And Dan Cohen, Max Blumenthal, those guys called down there and checked and found out it wasn't from Omicron. It wasn't from COVID. It was with COVID. And we never heard anything else about the number of deaths. That was it. They stopped checking the number of deaths. The hospitals were required to keep them. So do we really know how many people die of Omicron, knowing that, let me add this, it was estimated in the United States, 330 million people, that half of the people, 165 million people, had Omicron. Well, if 1% of the people died, that would be 1.65 million deaths just from Omicron. Forget the rest. But we know that there was allegedly 1 million deaths. But again, there's the with COVID, there's the from COVID issue. There are many of us who are suspect of that million deaths number, highly suspect. But the bottom line is, if 165 million people had COVID, the numbers didn't go up. It was like 900,000. So the numbers didn't go up. Right. So if 165,000 people died, that's 0.01% or something. So at that point, the deaths from COVID, if you're looking at the deaths after Omicron, it doesn't make sense that they'd have that kind of numbers. But okay, let's keep going. So what they say is, what may be driving the rest? I have a funny feeling there's certain questions that might not be asked, but let's see what they ask. Maybe they'll surprise us. People have shown that people who have recovered from COVID have a higher risk of heart disease, for example, and deaths from other causes. But these studies were based on infections early in the pandemic and found that ill health and death were more common in people who were very sick when they had COVID. Whether the same risk applies now with generally milder acute illness is doubtful. Another is secondary effects of COVID control lockdown measures, especially lockdowns, deterioration in health, mental health, healthy behavior such as exercise and eating well. The negative effects were most. So at least they're honest about that. There are many of us who feel there's a lot of people that didn't get tested for cancer. There's a lot of things that didn't happen that should have happened. And then, of course, I knew a lot of people that gained weight. They gained 30, 40 pounds. I knew a lot of people that gained a lot of weight during COVID and haven't lost it. And again, those are all reasons that are possibilities. There are also concerns that older people are not returning to socializing, and that a resulting lack of social connection may be affecting their health, and therefore mortality. Well, there are those of us who talked about that, didn't we? We said a couple of things. Number one, the issue of when you're associating with other people, your body is subjected to exposure to a lot of other germs, and therefore your immune system is stronger. Your immune system is more less vulnerable to things because it's seeing stuff and it's getting work. So again, the lockdown, sure. Now they'll say, now listen to this. While lockdowns do have consequences for public health in the early days of the pandemic, the benefits in reducing COVID transmission over the negative effects were clear. However, listen to this. Once most people had been vaccinated, the harms of such strict measures started to outweigh the benefits, in my view. So they mentioned vaccination. And they mentioned it. And it's like, yeah, there's lots of reasons. But once people got vaccinated, man, things turned around. Okay, let's see what else they could be possibly concerned with. The impact of the pandemic on healthcare services. There you go. That's it. Delays in accessing healthcare are associated with increased mortality. Righty. The UK has experienced 2 severe heat waves. There you go. Heat waves. That's killing them. They're just dropping dead of heat waves. Got to be that link between the state of the economy and increased mortality. Well, let's see. You have deliberately wiped your economy out. I don't imagine that'd be good for lives. Yeah. As we emerge from the acute phase of the pandemic, understanding the causes of these observed excess deaths and identifying how they can be reduced could next be the big public health challenge facing the UK. But I noticed something. There's one thing that is possible that for some reason you left that out. For some reason, it could be this. It could be people didn't get health care. Reasonable. And the things are reasonable. Related to lockdowns. We told you so. Related to people not association, which is lockdown. We told you so. All these things that we questioned and said these may not be a good idea. Oh, we're saving lives. Now there's no evidence that you save lives, but it certainly seems that you cost yourself some. So my point being, something's rotten in Denmark. Now I'm going to jump over to Rockfin, and I hope those of you who are my premium members will go over, because I'm going to go there and I'm going to talk about some of the reasons that might have been omitted. That's what we're going to do at Rockfin. Some things might have been omitted. For instance, Lisa Shaw. Interesting. And I don't know what caused that. There's an interesting article, don't you think? That's all I'm going to throw that out there. At any rate, so we're going to go over to Rockfin. I'm going to talk about some of the possibilities for excess deaths, and places where we're not our free speech isn't quite so shall we say restricted. And for those, again, hey, don't forget, everybody, I appreciate everybody who supports the channel, and everybody should be a Rockfin member. If you're a member here, please smash the like button. Please be a member on Rockfin, because they may cut me off at any time. Even just for going this far, they may cut me off. So I would appreciate it out of YouTube. Throw me off Twitter, all this stuff. Oh, Twitter, the bots are everywhere now. So all the Ukraine bots have found Garland, and they're all just day and night. You're doing this. You're a Russian bot. Twitter's got to throw this guy off. You know the game. You know the game. Which is how you know they're losing. That's how you know they're losing, when they start going after people. As they say, you're over the target when you start taking flack. So the Twitter, the red bots are, you Garland's, they're literally on there complaining to Twitter, he's a liar and a fraud and a Russian bot, he's got to go, so they're out there. But at any rate, so I'm going over to Rockfin. We're going to talk about this in a little bit more in depth on my Rockfin Premium, please. Anybody who can, it's $9.90 a month, $99, become a Rockfin Premium member. But if you can't, I'm on just about every day on Facebook. I'm on just about every day on Rockfin and things of that nature. So I really appreciate everybody who works with me and everybody who helps keep the channel going. Everybody who does the super chats and the buy me a coffees and all that stuff. All of that is in the show notes. Thanks a lot, everybody. I'm out.